Black Belt asked a black janitor to spar for fun. No one expected what happened next, in the middle of the room. Kenji, the dojo's most skilled student and a proud black belt, was finishing his final set of kicks. His movements were sharp and precise. The students clapped, feeding his pride even more. Kenji glanced at Marcus, who was quietly sweeping the floor, then smirked and said with a mocking tone, "Hey, Marcus, ever tried fighting? Or is cleaning up after fighters the only thing you're good at?" A few students laughed. Marcus rested his hands on the broom handle, lifted his head, and looked at Kenji in silence. His face didn't change, but there was a deep seriousness in his eyes. "You sure about that, son? You really want this?" he said softly, with a faint smile on his lips, the dojo filled with laughter. Kenji chuckled and replied, "Really? All right, old man. Let's have a little fun. Just a light spar. Don't take it personally." The elderly sensei sitting near the door lifted his gaze. He didn't say a word, but there was something in Marcus's tone that caught his attention. Marcus slowly set the broom aside, removed his gloves, and said in a calm yet resonant voice, "Fun is good. But remember, this mat doesn't care who you are. It only shows the truth." A confident grin spread across Kenji's face. He was already imagining the applause and laughter that would follow once he humbled the janitor. The students cleared space, excitement rising. Phones came out, cameras turned on. Marcus stepped forward calmly, his shoes squeaking softly against the mat. The laughter around them began to fade as everyone noticed something unusual about the way he moved. Slow, deliberate, balanced. There was a quiet power in his steps, the kind that only comes from years of discipline. He stopped at the center of the mat, bowed slightly, and said in a low, steady tone, "Whenever you're ready, son." And for the first time that night, the confidence on Kenji's face flickered, just a little. The air inside the dojo seemed to tighten as the students gathered in a wide circle around the mat. Excitement buzzed like static electricity. Every phone was out now, recording, eager to capture what everyone thought would be a funny moment. The overconfident janitor getting tossed around by the dojo's prized black belt. Marcus stepped to the center quietly, his movements smooth and deliberate. He bent down, untied his old worn-out work shoes, and set them neatly by the wall. As he straightened up, he rolled up his sleeves, revealing strong, sinewy arms marked by years of labor. And something else. The kind of muscle that comes not from lifting weights, but from discipline, from rhythm, from years of practice. Kenji smirked as he adjusted his black belt. "You ready, Marcus? Don't blame me when your back hurts tomorrow." Marcus didn't answer. He simply bowed, low with respect and stillness, then straightened up, hands loose at his sides. "Respect the art," he murmured. "Not the belt." Some of the students laughed again, whispering to each other. But their sensei, still seated at the far end of the room, leaned forward slightly, watching closely. His eyes narrowed. Something in Marcus's stance, his posture, his calm breathing, the way his feet were positioned, didn't belong to an amateur. It was old school, refined, the kind of balance you can't fake. Kenji took his stance, bouncing lightly, fast, confident. He lunged first, a textbook jab toward Marcus's chest, followed by a quick roundhouse kick. The movements were perfect, sharp, and rehearsed 1,000 times. But Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't block. He didn't even seem to move until the very last second. Then, almost too subtly to see, he shifted his weight and turned his body, letting Kenji's kick slide past harmlessly. Kenji stumbled half a step forward, thrown off balance not by power but by absence. A murmur spread through the students. Marcus hadn't even struck back, yet the exchange already looked different, unsettling. Kenji reset quickly, forcing a grin to hide his surprise. "Not bad, old man," he said. "You're quick." Marcus's face remained calm, unreadable. "Quickness fades," he said evenly. "Understanding doesn't." This time Kenji came faster. Combinations, low kick, high kick, punch, a blur of motion. Marcus moved like water, redirecting every attack with the smallest movement, never meeting force with force. It was like he was painting with Kenji's energy, turning every strike into a line that curved harmlessly away. Then, without warning, Marcus pivoted, one small, graceful motion, and tapped Kenji's shoulder with the side of his hand. Not a hit, not even a push, but it was enough to send the black belt stumbling backward, his balance broken. The dojo fell silent. The phone stopped shaking. Even the laughter had vanished. Marcus stepped back, gave a small nod, and said in a quiet, humble tone, "Your move, son." Kenji straightened slowly, his breathing heavier now. For the first time, the pride in his eyes gave way to something else: confusion and respect. Kenji steadied his breath, the faint echo of laughter still lingering in his ears, now replaced by the heavy silence of disbelief. The students around the mat stood frozen, unsure whether to cheer or gasp. For the first time, the confident black belt felt a sting of unease crawl up his spine. He had sparred with champions before, but never had anyone made him feel so powerless without even striking. He took a step back, resetting his stance, rolling his shoulders. "All right," he muttered under his breath. "No more playing around." His eyes sharpened, the smirk fading. The room felt smaller, tighter. Marcus didn't move. He stood still, calm as stone, eyes soft but focused. His breathing remained slow, deep, steady, the kind of breathing you only learn after decades of control. He simply nodded once, as if inviting Kenji to begin again. Kenji darted forward, faster this time. His footwork was lightning quick, a blur of jabs, feints, and a sudden spin kick aimed straight at Marcus's ribs. The students gasped, convinced this one would land. But Marcus turned with the movement, letting Kenji's kick flow past his body, and with a subtle motion of his hand, redirected the younger man's momentum. Before Kenji even realized what happened, his legs were swept from beneath him, and he hit the mat with a dull thud. The breath rushed out of his lungs. Gasps erupted all around. The phones caught everything: the speed, the grace, the effortless control. Marcus didn't gloat. He simply stepped back and waited, offering a hand to help Kenji up. Kenji ignored it and pushed himself off the mat, cheeks burning with embarrassment. "Again," he said, gritting his teeth. Marcus tilted his head slightly, almost saddened by the young man's pride. "It's not about winning, son," he said quietly. "It's about understanding when to stop fighting." But Kenji charged anyway, this time with pure aggression. His strikes lost their rhythm, more emotion than technique. Marcus moved differently now, not fast, but flowing. He slipped between Kenji's attacks like wind between leaves. Then, in one elegant motion, he turned his wrist, grabbed Kenji's arm, and twisted just enough to bring him down again. Gently, precisely, without pain, but with authority. Kenji froze, his face pressed lightly against the mat. Marcus released him instantly, stepping back and bowing slightly. "Control," he said softly, "isn't about how hard you hit. It's about how little you need to." The dojo was silent. Even the sensei, who had watched hundreds of fights in his lifetime, leaned forward, his eyes wide. Kenji sat up slowly, sweat dripping from his forehead, pride shattered, yet something new glowing inside him. Curiosity and a growing respect. What style is that?" he asked quietly, his voice trembling with exhaustion and awe. Marcus smiled faintly, the first real warmth in his expression. "Old school discipline," he replied. "Taught by a man who believed the belt means nothing without humility." "Maybe you've heard his name. Grandmaster Lewis." A ripple of recognition went through the room. Even Kenji's eyes widened. That name, Grandmaster Lewis, was legend. A pioneer in martial arts history, known for both his power and his compassion. Kenji swallowed hard, staring at Marcus with disbelief. You trained under him?" Marcus nodded once humbly. "A long time ago. Before people cared about cameras and trophies?" No one spoke. No one laughed. The janitor standing before them was no longer invisible. He was something else entirely, a living echo of a forgotten era. Marcus gave a small bow again and said softly, "Now you understand. Respect isn't given. It's earned every time you step on this mat." Kenji bowed in return, this time with genuine humility. And as he did, the students watching began to realize that the lesson they had just witnessed wasn't about fighting at all. It was about character. The dojo was quieter than it had ever been. The tension that once filled the air had transformed into something softer. Respect, reflection, and a hint of shame. The students who had laughed moments ago now stood still, their phones lowered, their faces thoughtful. The sound of the city outside seemed far away. Marcus sat cross-legged on the mat, his janitor uniform slightly wrinkled, the broom resting against the wall behind him. Kenji sat opposite him, legs folded, sweat still dripping down his forehead, but his eyes were no longer filled with arrogance, only curiosity and humility. Around them, the students slowly formed a circle, sitting down too, silent and attentive, like children listening to a master. Marcus spoke quietly, his voice calm and steady. "You know, I used to teach," he said. "Not in big dojos like this, just in a small community center on the east side. Kids who couldn't afford uniforms, who didn't have anyone to teach them discipline. They came for fighting, but I tried to show them living." Kenji listened. His head bowed slightly. Marcus continued, "One thing I told them every day. The belt doesn't define the warrior. The heart does. The belt fades, but your heart, your humility, your respect, those are what remain." The students glanced at one another, their faces softening with realization. The words cut deeper than any punch or kick could. Marcus smiled faintly, eyes distant, remembering. "We used to train barefoot on concrete floors. No trophies, no crowds, no applause. Just the sound of breath and focus. My teacher, Grandmaster Lewis, used to say, 'If your goal is to be stronger than others, you'll always be weak. But if your goal is to be better than yourself, no one can defeat you.'" Kenji exhaled slowly, his pride melting away completely. "I didn't see it before," he said softly. "I thought fighting was about proving something." Marcus nodded. "That's what most people think at first. But martial arts isn't about proving strength. It's about protecting peace. In others, and inside yourself." The sensei, who had been silent all this time, stood up from the corner. His eyes were moist with emotion. "Marcus," he said gently, "you honor this dojo tonight." Marcus shook his head humbly. "I didn't come here to teach, sensei. I just came to clean the mats. But sometimes," he said with a quiet smile, "the mat teaches for you." The students bowed together, not out of habit, but from genuine reverence. Even Kenji lowered his forehead to the mat, staying there for a long moment before rising. The laughter, the arrogance, the pride, all of it had been replaced with silence, gratitude, and awe. Marcus looked around at their young faces and said in a voice filled with quiet wisdom, "Remember this, all of you, the mat doesn't lie. It doesn't care how much you boast, how much you've won, or what belt you wear. It shows exactly who you are when everything else is stripped away." The sensei nodded solemnly. "Tonight," he said softly, "we all saw who you truly are, Marcus. A master hiding behind humility." Marcus gave a small smile, his gaze falling on the broom leaning in the corner. "I'm just someone still learning," he replied. "And the best students never stop cleaning what they love." The words lingered in the quiet air like an echo of truth, and every person in that dojo knew this night, this lesson, would stay with them for the rest of their lives. A week had passed, yet the energy of that night still lingered in the dojo like a quiet spirit. The story had spread beyond its walls, whispered among students, shared in nearby gyms, and replayed on every phone that recorded it. But for those who had been there in person, it wasn't just a video anymore. It was a memory, a lesson carved deep into their hearts. Early one morning, sunlight streamed through the tall windows, spilling across the polished wooden floor. The dojo walls were freshly cleaned, the mats neatly aligned. Near the entrance, a new photograph had been hung, a simple frame showing Marcus in his janitor's uniform, standing beside Kenji and the other students. Marcus was holding a mop in one hand and a black belt draped over the other. Below the photo, a single line was written, "True mastery is found in humility." The students arrived quietly that morning, each one pausing in front of the photo. Some smiled, others bowed lightly before stepping onto the mat. There was no more boasting, no more ego, only respect. Kenji was already there, sweeping the floor just as Marcus used to. His black belt was tied neatly around his waist, but his movements were slower, more mindful. When Marcus walked in carrying his bucket and broom, Kenji immediately stopped and bowed deeply. "Sensei Marcus," he said sincerely, his voice low, filled with gratitude. Marcus chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Don't call me that, son. I just keep the place clean." Kenji looked up, smiling. "You cleaned more than the floors that night," he said quietly. "You cleaned my pride." For a moment, Marcus didn't answer. He simply studied the young man, seeing the change in his eyes, the humility that wasn't there before. Slowly, he nodded. "That's what real martial arts does," he said. "It scrubs the ego until only truth remains." They began to sweep together, master and student, janitor and fighter, side by side. The broom strokes made a soft, steady rhythm, almost meditative. The sensei stood by the door watching, a proud smile spreading across his weathered face. After they finished, Marcus placed the broom against the wall and looked around the dojo. The morning light painted golden lines across the floor, making the room glow. He took a slow breath, then turned to Kenji. "Remember," Marcus said, his voice gentle but firm. "Real power doesn't shout. It breathes. It doesn't need to prove itself. It simply is." Kenji nodded deeply, those words sinking into him like a vow. "I'll remember," he said. Marcus smiled, that same calm, humble smile that had silenced the room a week before. He picked up his cleaning cart and began to walk away, his steps unhurried, peaceful. As the door closed behind him, the students stood in silence. They didn't see a janitor leaving. They saw a man who had reminded them what true strength looks like. Outside, the morning sun rose higher, its light spilling across the dojo sign. The world would go on. People would chase belts, trophies, titles. But for everyone who stood in that room, one truth remained. Greatness isn't found in power or pride. It's found in the quiet heart of those who serve with humility.